Hey everybody, Chris here from the academyofworship.org, and today in this podcast I am tired and it's been a crazy week for me. You may have noticed that the channel didn't release anything last week, and that's because so much is going on. I just had to take a break for that week, so I apologize for the absence, but today's topic in this podcast kind of deals with things that kind of dovetail into a lot of the stuff that was happening last week, not specifically with me, but things that were in my sphere or in my, orbit, whatever, not my orbit, you know what I'm talking about. And today we're talking about burnout. We're going to be talking about just kind of the reality of mental health, the things that we have to deal with, not only in ministry or church and things that have to do with our faith life, but just in life in general. And I think that this is a topic that it's talked about every once in a while, but I think if you tune into any other faith-based podcast or even just YouTube channel that's teaching musical stuff or whatever, I mean, you're not going to really hear too much talk about the reality of just life and the weights and what it's like to experience certain things in life that we don't like to acknowledge it or whatever. And like I was saying, I'm not going to go into detail, but like last week, there was a lot going on with a close friend and some things that started me thinking about mental health overall, but that, like I said, kind of worked really well with ministry and a very common thing that happens to people. And you've probably heard the term or you've experienced it, or at least some degree of it, and that's burnout. So I don't know. I'm kind of freewheeling it today. I thought I'd just kind of roll tape, as it were, and talk about this because I don't know, my mind's all over the place on it. So I hope that something coherent comes out of this. And more than that, I really hope it blesses someone out there. I hope that someone listens to this and understands that if you are going through some of the things we talk about or think about, you're not alone, and there's much more in life and the things that God has to offer than I think we admit to ourselves in this very real thing. So if you're into listening and talking about something that's a little heavier than usual, then, pull up a coffee and let's engage. And if not, then I suppose you can just wait till I release some other content that has nothing to do with serious stuff, I guess. But I think all of us out there are real enough to kind of sit down and talk about some of this stuff that we avoid. But so burnout. What is burnout? I think there's a really general way to talk about burnout, and then I think there's a very specific Christian way to talk about burnout. And I think that if we were asking, the world, people who may not be Christian or whatever, and use the word burnout, what does it mean? And I think a lot of people think of it as being tired or overworked or, all those words that I think we use to somewhat describe burnout. But in my life and maybe yours and in people that I've talked to in ministry specifically, burnout has, unforeseen consequences or things that people don't realize maybe is burnout in the first place. And they kind of, push through it because the world tells us, hey, if you're tired or if you have, you're burning the candle at both ends or you're too busy, because we always talk about how busy we are and all these things. It's like, just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and just, trudge through it or get through it. And I think that God has given us certain wherewithals to deal with certain things, but I think that that's a pretty shallow answer to someone who may be actually experiencing some, mental trauma, some things that are actually going on that are hurting our families and things around us. So I'm not talking about just being tired we're not talking about just, you know, you want a vacation. I'm not talking about that specifically, although I'm sure those things could help alleviate certain things. But what we're talking about in this podcast is the burnout that affects everything around you. God, it's really hard to quantify, not because it's hard to define, because you can see it in someone. Some of the and again, I'm not even, again, just disclaimer, I didn't put this up front. I'm not a mental health professional, so if any of this seems familiar, I'm only talking anecdotally, just from my experience and what I've seen, and then what I've also experienced myself. But don't use anything I'm saying in this to diagnose anything for reals. If you are dealing with some serious stuff or hurting and need to reach out to someone, then please stop this video or this audio podcast and go seek something out. Go seek out biblical counseling, either from a qualified professional, whether it's a counselor or a pastor, but someone who actually can speak into your life and counsel you biblically on the proper response to certain things that we're going to be talking about. Even mental health professionals, there's no shame in that. Just, reach out, because, when stuff goes undiagnosed and you try to trudge through it and you can't, there can be serious consequences. So, but anyway, back to what I was saying. The burnout that I have seen, the burnout that I've experienced, it tends to, depending on your personality, and I'll be talking about my personality, which I know isn't reflective of everyone out there. So if you don't hear these things in your personality, then don't feel bad, because you may be experiencing this in a different way. But it tends to affect relationships, because in my life, because I did experience burnout, it was a while ago, and I still experience parts of it, but I've learned to recognize, and that's one of the benefits in coming through it and admitting things to yourself, and maybe having, like I said before, people speak into your life and, speak the truth in love, and all those things. You can come out the other side of it and kind of recognize when it's creeping up on your life. But I noticed that the way I was treating people, it starts with the basic stuff, like you're short with people, you don't want to deal with people, you end up pushing people away, even inadvertently, like you're not necessarily ignoring them. It's just they don't want to be around you anymore because you're more and more negative. You find it harder and harder to do the things that used to bring you joy in the Lord. So in this case, if we're talking about music ministry, then all of a sudden you're not seeing it through the light of praising God and just bringing God's people into worship. It's this trudgy thing, and you have to, why do I have to do this? And why am I dealing with X, and why is Y happening? And not again. Joe Bob Blow has to deal with this thing, and now I have to get pulled into it. All these things that, and I apologize to any Joe Bob Blows out there, because, so that's like one of the things that can happen is you're not recognizing that you are the issue. It's everyone around you is the issue. And I think that, that's a really hard one to see, because again, everyone around you is the problem, and you're pointing out all the things around you which are wrong, which are causing, pick the situation that someone else is causing that, not you. And usually in hindsight, again, once you've gotten some help, or at least just not even necessarily therapy, but just really get to kind of stop or be pulled out of that situation, in hindsight, you see that obviously the problem was you. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people that exacerbate the issue, because there are certain situations and people and stuff that do, but that's no excuse for us in ministry or otherwise, to be honest, to treat people the way that when you're experiencing burnout, you treat people. So that's one thing I noticed. It was a big one. Your world kind of, or your worldview. I don't mean your biblical worldview or how you see the world as far as, although maybe this is the case, but I mean like the way you experience the world becomes more gray. And this, of course, leads into depression and things like this. And again, depression is one of those things where sometimes you're experiencing depression. Sometimes that you're right in the middle of this and you don't want to get out of bed. And that's an extreme depression. And again, if you're experiencing that, please get help. But sometimes depression can manifest itself in different ways. Like for myself, I have had that kind of depression. But I also know that depression can be almost the opposite effect. You can kind of overdo it. You can double up on your efforts to do things and find fault in yourself. So like for myself, I'm a very I need to pull myself up by the bootstraps. I'm always worried about how people think of me, and if I'm living up to whatever, most of the time probably false expectation people have of me, I drive myself harder because I didn't live up to whatever fake expectation there was. So there's a lot of that where depression can kind of warp you into seeing situations and people and events and pick your thing wrong. You can have a warped view of that. And, I don't claim to know all the ways that depression can manifest or even burnout for that matter, but I do know in my life, I've seen that and I've seen other people have to go through that. There's probably lots of other ways burnout can happen. But most of the time you become critical. You're critical of the people who are over you. So let's say you're in a ministry position. If a pastor is over you, or if you're submitting to some other authority or whatever, or even let's just say in your job or whatever it is, whatever authority is around you, church authority, job authority, you tend to, I don't know, I won't say lash out, although that can happen. You tend to see that as an issue and tend to be very critical of that. I've mentioned in a previous podcast that my family has recently changed churches, and it's been a very good thing. And I didn't realize, I did to a certain extent, but again, in hindsight, you kind of go, oh man, I didn't realize I was having that issue. And I was very critical of things that I shouldn't have been, or, I should have submitted to and just not had an issue with. Now, there were plenty of things that you're allowed to be critical of and stuff, but we're not talking about those. We're talking about just you show up to church or you show up to your job, you show up to whatever, and really no one can do any right. no one can do anything right in your eyes, and they're just morons. And this is all something that you're manufacturing in your head. And granted, don't get me wrong, people do things wrong. I'm just saying that your lens that you have put on because of burnout creeping into your life, because you're not giving yourself a physical break, you're not giving yourself a mental break, you're not doing the things to help yourself, you're not seeking help, whatever it is, and we'll talk about some of that in a bit. You're just done. You have no emotional reserves left. And again, this is all stuff you don't necessarily see about yourself. You don't realize this. You either need someone from the outside telling you this, or through other circumstances, whether it's getting fired or let go or dismissed or put on involuntary sabbatical, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, then you have hindsight and see this stuff. But that's it. You kind of have this wall up and everything becomes this gray, no one can do right. You have, resentment, you're critical. And it really infects and permeates every single thing you do. It'll affect your relationships in ministry. It'll affect your relationships in your family, like your marriage with your kids, your job. It'll affect extracurricular activities, because even those become not helpful. There's no real release there. If you have a hobby or something, sometimes they help a little, I guess, but overall, it's like you can't get away. You can't get away from the issue. You can't get away from, what you see as the idiocy and the stupidity and the incompetence and all the things that you think make sense. All the things that you can come up with as an excuse, all of that, it just affects everything, gets into everything. Another thing I can think of that really kind of crops up is you can get really into a kind of and this is part of the maybe depression and stuff. Like, there's a lot of, I'm sure, reasons this happens, but I've noticed there's a woe is me mentality. You start being okay with being, quote, the victim. Again, whether that's intentional or not, I think some people are very intentional with that. Some people don't realize they're doing it. And that, again, can start affecting everything around you. Because like I had mentioned, at this point in burnout, you don't see it happening, but people around you see it happening. Something's wrong, whether you admit it or not. Your subconscious might even be telling you that, but something's not right. You may be even able to look at kind of the past and realize, I used to find joy in this, or I used to be excited to do this or X or Y or whatever the thing that we're talking about. Because burnout comes in so many flavors and for so many reasons that I'm not going to be able to, specifically tell you what burnout is as far as for you. But if you're seeing any of these indicators or flags, it's important that you have to, go to your quiet place with the Lord and admit it. You have to come to a realization and admit to the Lord that something's wrong, number one. I think that's always the case when there's something, when you're struggling with even a sin or something like that. You have to admit it, right? You have to say it. You have to bring it into the light. The Lord already knows, right? It's not like we're hiding this from God. But we definitely hide it from ourselves, and we definitely don't want to admit that something's wrong. So I guess as we transition into the, okay, now what? There's a problem. That would be the first thing you have to do. And it's probably the hardest thing to do. I suppose some people have an easier time with it than others. I can admit that is very hard for me to do, because as a friend of mine puts it, and I agree with this way of thinking about it, I suppose. I am a recovering high priest in the church of self-reliance. That always stuck with me when he told me that. Because you're convinced you can do this on your own. You're convinced that, whatever problem it is, you can fix it. You don't got to involve other people. You don't have to, all these ridiculous things we tell ourselves. But once whether it's, and again, there's some people that can hear it from the outside when somebody goes, something is wrong and we need to sit down and talk about it. Or maybe it's progressed to a point where your pastor or a leader or a boss or whoever sits you down and says, we need to talk because there's an issue here. And of course, you're going to be defensive. If you're like me anyway, you're going to be defensive. You're going to want to put up that wall. You're going to want to blame the person that's telling you this, and you're going to want to be angry. And I wish I could tell you that's not normal, because it seems to be. I've both been that person and I've dealt with those people. But there are people out there, and maybe you're one of them, that can hear that and immediately recognize the issue and humble yourself to a point where you said, yep, I need help. You're right. There's a problem. And maybe you're the former person, but you've gone so far into this land of being burned out that you got no other choice than to just admit it. So wherever you're at in that spectrum, hear it from me. I mean, it may not mean anything to you, but I understand. And I'm willing to bet that if you are in this situation, that there are people around you that will understand as well. Because there's probably someone in your life that's already gone through this, or maybe is going through this. So it won't be a foreign concept to them, this burnout thing. It's very common in the church. I mean, I think that if you haven't already or even heard about it, if you start researching this online, and there's books on it, there's whole industries built around this whole thing. But in church, I think it's very easy for us to sweep it under the rug, not talk about it. And we're just, people's lives are in ruins, behind us, whether it's our own or someone else's, and we don't acknowledge it. And I think it's just really important to. It's really important to acknowledge it, and I don't mind being one of the voices speaking up about it. So admitting it, that would be obviously step one. I think that's step one in a lot of problems we have as humans, is admitting the problem, right? But in this particular case, you have to acknowledge that you're burned out. And it doesn't mean you're just tired, like I said. It doesn't mean you're just depressed. It can mean a lot of things, and the flags for it are many. So do a self-evaluation when either approached from this, or maybe, like I said, you're just recognizing something's not right. Evaluate it. And burnout can happen pretty early on. It can happen to people who maybe don't have a whole lot of responsibility. It can happen to people who have a ton of responsibility, and it can happen at any point on the timeline of that responsibility. And once you admit that you have this issue, that you're dealing with a burnout issue, the next step would be something along the lines of talking to someone about it and finding a way for you to take a step back. Now, I don't mean, this one's important because there's a lot of people I think that do this. I've done it myself. I'm guilty of this. Sometimes you just want to take your ball and go home. You just, as it were, you just want to throw up your hands. You want to walk away and not deal with it for a long time. Let someone else deal with it because I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And as Christians, we have to be really careful about what that means if that's the path we want to take, because that's burning bridges. That's definitely not building up the body. There's a lot of maturity things that would come up if I were to see someone do that I would question. And I think that as leaders, we're called to more. So I would sit down with your pastor, if you haven't already, or a brother or sister that you trust, depending on, if you're a man, sit down with a man. If you're a woman, sit down with a woman. And someone that's, you trust implicitly, and just talk. I mean, be honest with them. I mean, say all the gross things it's in your head. Say all the terrible things and all the things that you don't think anyone's going to be able to hear you say because they'll think something bad of you. And again, this is a very trusting thing. And if you don't have a brother or sister around you that you trust in that way, then find a therapist, or a biblical therapist would be fantastic. If not that, then at least a therapist. Someone that won't betray your trust, because a lot of this breaking the cycle, as it were, the thing has to do with trust. So, and you need to get it out in the light. You need to say it. Once you find this person and are able to articulate, even badly, don't even worry about, it sounding like some coherent thought. Sometimes the best, and I'm using this air quotes for therapy, some of the best therapy is just the mind dump, trying to get all of the emotions out at the same time. It's frustrating, but it's very I don't want to use the word liberating because that's overused, but it's cathartic and it helps because sometimes, look, let's be honest, sometimes an emotion can't be expressed in words. It's just, I don't know, crying or yelling, so that's not wrong either. It's just, again, the trust between you and the brother or you and the sister and, or professional or whomever you've chosen and find to be able to do this. But once you articulate all this and get it out there, it's easy to start talking about the realities behind some of these feelings. Because a lot of the time, as previously talked about, the way that you're seeing the world and the way that you're perceiving things isn't necessarily accurate. It's all colored by this burnout that you're experiencing. And so a lot of times in talking through it, you'll be able to get to root issues. You'll be able to see things as they really are. Even if you don't accept them yet, you'll be able to see them as they really are. And, or at least begin to see them as they really are so that you can work through it. But I think the third and final stage then, after talking this through, you recognize it first, painfully and horribly sometimes. 2, you find someone you trust and they love you and you love them and you blab it all. And 3, usually you're going to step back, step down, do something that gets you away from the causes that you've identified in step 2. Or even if it's something that's not necessarily, quote, causing it, like it's not an outside force that's making you burn out. It's just you have so much on your plate or, lack of time to do something else sometimes causes it. You're so engrossed in what you're doing. You're the guilt for not being able to pay attention to your family or another thing that you would like to do in your lifetime. You're so that causes it. So there's a million ways that this can happen. But once you've identified it, then you need to step back and you need to do it in a biblical way, which means without tearing a brother or a sister down, without tearing apart a church or splitting a church body or gossiping or all of the sins that we can struggle with in a situation where we feel either attacked or whether we are or not attacked. Sometimes we lash out and do all these things. And so when you're making this step down or transition into a break or a vacation, sabbatical, all the names you can call it, do it in a loving way. And sometimes you have to have outside influences from pastors or people that love you and are they're biblically sound and they're mature in their faith and things like that. They can walk with you through this and make sure that you're not, taking your ball and going home, that you're not going to do anything to hurt the body and vice versa, that you're not going to feel hurt by the body, that this congregation, this brother and sisterhood that we have, hey, we're all sinners. We all walk through this stuff and it's real and it hurts and it's not fun, but we, at the end of it, want to glorify God. We want God to be glorified in, despite our sin, through the healing of that sin, through our pain, through recovery, and all of the things that surround it. Not because he's causing these things, but because he's big enough and he is worthy of all the praise. That's why we're doing this, is to give him all praise, glory, and honor. And if we can't, at the end of the day, even though we're walking through this terrible time, do that, then, that we're doing it wrong. So find a way to do that. Now, it's going to involve Bible study. It's going to involve prayer. And this is all on your part, but hopefully with brothers and sisters. So prayer, it's going to involve worship. It's going to involve a lot of things that you're probably already doing, and if not, it's a good spiritual discipline to start, or at least do more, because this isn't just a of the flesh thing. You can't. Burnout's not solved in the flesh, ever. As much as we'd like to say we did, or that we pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps and that whole I did it myself thing, the world can think that all at once. But if you believe what you say you believe, and I believe what I say I believe, then we can't leave it at the bootstraps level. We have to understand that God has to heal this, and God has to be involved in this intimately. So it's a big ball of going through stuff. And as I said at the beginning, I'm not a mental health professional, so I'm not diagnosing anybody out there, or myself for that matter. But I have seen these things, and anecdotally, I'm telling you how this usually works out and how the healthy ways of coming out of it have ended up. Because the unhealthy way is usually a break in the body of the church, the person walking away and being hurt and not wanting to ever come back to church, or some version of that, or even more severe, maybe there's medical issues involved that didn't need to be, or God forbid someone, wants to hurt themselves or take their own life, or something that serious. And the hope, of course, in this is that you would catch it before it ever got to that level. But it's real. Burnout is real. And mental health is something we need to consider as Christians. You may or may not agree with me. I don't know what faith tradition you come from. I know there's some out there that I'm probably talking crazy, or that they think I don't even know, but I don't really care. So I've seen it firsthand, and I know that I and other people who have gone through it love the Lord, and maybe you're experiencing some of this, and you probably love the Lord too. So I want to encourage you at the end of all this, and it's a very heavy episode, I understand that, but at the end of all this, I want to encourage all of you out there that whether you're struggling with this, or you know someone who is struggling with this, it's say something. Either to yourself, admit it to yourself, or talk to someone if you're going through it, or if you know someone, say something, because we love each other. And the best thing you can do in love is to tell someone that you see something. The worst thing we can do to each other as brothers and sisters is not say something. And I don't mean to be rude or to be mean to the person, but to seriously, I'm concerned for you. I'm concerned with your, where you're at mentally and where you're at spiritually, or whatever the case may be. And I would want to be a resource for you and help and love on you. What can I do? Speak up. But if you're going through this, please, like I said, say something, admit something, and take care of it. It's not going to go away. It just gets worse. Trust me, it just gets worse. So I truly do appreciate all of you out there. The channel right now has like 260 something plus subscribers, which, I started this channel as a pure, I love the body of the church. I have some things that I think people might find useful to teach, and so I teach it. This podcast was designed as just kind of you and me sitting down and having a coffee chat, I guess, and talking about things that are in the church, some things that maybe aren't, and just having a real talk. So I'm really appreciative of all of you out there for tuning in, and any new subscribers we have out there is awesome. But the fact that we have that many it kind of blows my mind, because like I said, I didn't start this to get known, internet famous, or some silly thing like that. And I hope it's helpful. That's what I'm getting at. I hope that at least what we're talking about right here is helpful. Maybe it's something you've never heard before. Maybe it's something that you didn't know that you could walk through with a brother or sister, or all the other lies that we tell ourselves and that we believe from Satan. Whatever it is, whatever the reason that you may not be dealing with it or want to deal with it, do it. Deal with it. It's real. We all love you. I'm appreciative of all of you out there. And I hope that we can come together as a community, as a faith community, but also as a musical community, and recognize that these things are something we have to deal with. And it's something that we don't like to deal with, that we like to sweep under the rug and move on. And we got to stop. So, love you guys. And I hope this has been okay. I hope that it wasn't too heavy for those of you out there, anyone who stuck with this whole thing, this whole episode. And I hope that you come back and I didn't scare anybody off, because we're not going to always be talking about heavy stuff. But like I said, this last week put a lot of things into focus that I wanted to concentrate on. And it just made me want to just kind of talk. And so this is as much therapy for me as it is for anyone else out there that may be listening. So that's it. That's all I got to say. And I think that was a good podcast. I'm pretty happy with that. But I hope to see you again. I'm hoping to get back to the weekly content releases. So stay tuned for that. And, if you're on YouTube watching this, then leave a comment. Let me know anything you feel comfortable letting me know, or hit me up at academyofworship@gmail.com. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, or however you want to talk to me. That's fine. I love hearing from everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.